Well, House Speaker Mike Johnson appears to be on very solid ground after all, following the passage of foreign aid bills. He received backing from the head of the GOP, former President Donald Trump, yesterday, who said that Mike Johnson is, quote, trying very hard and is, quote, a very good person. What an endorsement. Following his day in a Manhattan courtroom, Donald Trump continued that we have a majority of one. It's not like he, the speaker, can go and do whatever he wants to do. Trump also praised Johnson for standing strong on urging NATO countries to increase their defense spending commitments. Trump's remarks seem to signal exactly what he does not want in an election year: for the House to blow up in chaos. This obviously coming one day after Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene vowed to force out Mike Johnson.
Meanwhile, the Senate yesterday advanced the aid package for Ukraine and Israel, which the House passed last week. Joining us now to weigh in on all of this is congressional reporter at The Hill, Michael Schnell. Welcome back, Michael.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, update us on where we are now. Obviously, we have the foreign aid package, but also, we didn't mention this in the read, the TikTok ban was a part of this whole rigmarole.
Yeah, I mean, this was months in the making, guys. We've been following every development with this foreign aid package. And finally, yesterday, it got sent to President Biden's desk, the Senate approving a package that contained 4 bills: one, aid for Ukraine; another, aid for Israel; a third, aid for allies in the Indo-Pacific; and that fourth sort of grab bag of national security priorities, which, of course, includes that bill that would essentially have a potential ban of TikTok in the U.S., forcing ByteDance, the China-based parent company of TikTok, to either sell the platform, divest from the platform, or face a ban in the U.S. And there's about a year period for that divestment period. So the Senate passed that package of bills in an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote. It came just a few days after the House voted on each of those 4 separate provisions, passing them and sending them to the House. Now it's up to President Biden. He's got to sign it. He has said multiple occasions that he will sign that package as soon as it lands on his desk. And then that aid, guys, is on its way to allies overseas.
So I would say that previously the MAGA faction, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Thomas Masseys, were at least benefiting from maybe some ambiguity in what Trump's position on all of this was. I think most of the comments in support of what the speaker was doing with respect to what Trump felt about it came from the speaker himself. But now we're hearing it from the horse's mouth, Trump saying that he supports what Johnson is doing. So where does this put the MAGA opposition? They can no longer claim that they're in Trump's good graces in terms of what they're doing to oppose the speaker.
Yeah, this was sort of an interesting situation, interesting dynamics, because for months, former President Trump had said no more aid for Ukraine. We need to care about our borders at the southern border. You know, other NATO countries need to be paying their fair share. That was sort of his stance. And then we've seen him soften that a bit, particularly when he was standing beside Speaker Mike Johnson at Mar-a-Lago. Former President Trump asked about Ukraine aid, didn't categorically push it to the side and say no. He amplified this idea of sending aid to Ukraine in the form of a loan, which was something that was embraced by Speaker Johnson and was in that aid package that the House and the Senate passed that President Biden now has to sign. So we haven't seen this categorical opposition from former President Trump to Ukraine aid like we had seen in the past. Instead, we saw him amplify this idea of a loan, which was embraced by lawmakers up on Capitol Hill. But look, some of former President Trump's most fiercest foot soldiers are still in stark opposition to Ukraine aid. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Senator J.D. Vance. Those are folks who we saw vote against this aid package and really rail against it, warning their leaders of their chambers not to put Ukraine aid on the floor and lambasting them when they ended up doing it. So look, this was an interesting dynamic for the former president, an interesting change, a soften. I'm going to be interested to see now if it changes the lens and the perspective of some of those America First Republicans. I bet it doesn't, because they have been so entrenched and dug in. But also with the caveat of the former president, you never know when his views on something are going to change, when he can soften something or go hawkish on another thing again.
I mean, Michael, let's take a trip down memory lane. It wasn't too long ago, just the end of last year, that Republicans were saying absolutely no, that there was the whole discourse around whether or not Democrats had put forward a conservative enough immigration bill that would incentivize Republicans to get on board with this. There were condemnations of there being a joint package saying let's bifurcate this stuff up so that we don't have to pass all of these incentives. Let's say I'm for aid to Israel but against aid to Ukraine as one of these kind of MAGA Republicans. That is the line I'm going to draw in the sand. And now look at what we have Lindsey Graham saying. He tweeted out after this vote, there is no doubt that President Trump's support for turning portions of this aid into a loan was a game changer for getting this across the line. President Trump's involvement, reframing this as a loan that will be repaid as opposed to another tally on America's debt burden, reframing this, giving permission, as it were, for Republicans to go ahead and vote for this does seem to be instrumental to this bill having passed. That being said, there are a number of people who did not vote for this bill. And some folks, I know that journalist Michael Tracy was making this argument on Twitter last night, may have done so not because of an ideological opposition to this aid package, but because they're auditioning for VP. What do you make of this argument, particularly as it pertains to Marco Rubio and Tim Scott?
I mean, yeah, it's entirely possible, of course, that, when you're in 2024, when you're in an election year, but even more than that, when you're just months away from November, everything is political. And particularly this aid package, this conversation about foreign aid, has been political from the start. Remember, Republicans had demanded that any foreign aid, any aid sent to Ukraine, had to be paired with border security. So the senators took it upon themselves to create a bipartisan Senate group to come up with a border security deal. Now, despite multiple doubts that would actually happen, Chris Murphy, Senator Langford, and Kyrsten Sinema, they came up with a bipartisan border deal, something that had been elusive for decades, but they had come to get. And then former President Trump killed it. And Republicans killed it because they essentially said that they didn't want to hand President Biden a bipartisan win on the border so close to the election. And so, every single twist and turn of this conversation has been political in nature. It has had that political slant to it because, again, we're in an election year and so close to November, getting closer and closer by the day. So I don't think there's, any surprise that we maybe see some Republicans vote against this or deal with this foreign aid conversation in a particular way in the lens of the veep stakes for the former president. Of course, we have seen, we know that the former president is a watcher of political affairs. He watches what happens on Capitol Hill. He oftentimes comments on it in real time on Truth Social. So, I think it's definitely within the realm of possibility that some of the votes cast and some of the ways that senators and House members dealt with this particular issue, because it was so explosive, because it was so, on the focus of the former president, may be in a way to try to get the tip of the hat for the veep stakes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way of putting it. You're right. Republicans said no Ukraine funding without a border security bill. And then they said, actually, we don't want a border security bill. Here's Ukraine funding anyway. I don't know. How do they explain that story to their voters who ostensibly, many very conservative voters that are the primary voters for many of these representatives, who obviously put pressure on them for the party to change the direction it feels philosophically about Ukraine funding? They have to be feeling whiplash at this point, no?
Yeah, well, I mean, how they defend it depends on who you ask. So you talk to the Chip Roys of the world, they say that this was a complete surrender. They say that they should have kept fighting hard for border security, that this is the reason why you have the majority. Then you talk to somebody like Speaker Johnson, who says, well, I wanted to address the situation at the southern border, but look at the dynamics that we have right now. We hear him talk about this a lot. He says that we have a very small majority in one half of one third of the government. Republicans have that slim majority in the House, which is one half of the legislative branch. They don't have control of the Senate, and they don't have the control of the White House. So just by that fact, they're going to be unable to slam through a number of these conservative priorities that they want. So Johnson, I said, we will keep trying, but in this juncture, the intelligence is too important. Ukraine is too in need of support. We need to stand by Israel, our closest ally in the Middle East. And so we need to leave border security for now on the cutting room floor because of the situation at hand. And then he talked to some other Republicans who say, well, we tried at border security, but we got to win here because we got Ukraine aid going. We got aid going to Ukraine as a loan and not as just, sending that foreign aid overseas and tacking it up on the national debt. So essentially, when we see bipartisan deals like this, guys, there are oftentimes sweeteners put in for both sides, ways that Republicans can claim victories, ways that Democrats can claim victories. So they gives them cover to vote for it, go back to their home districts and explain why they voted for it. That was something that we saw here with that loan aspect, and then just Democrats getting the Ukraine that they had so pushed for months.
You know, it's worth noting that not all Republicans are accepting this framing of it as a loan. Tim Burchett of Tennessee said, quote, "I think it's a joke." He told that to the Washington Examiner. He went on to say, "They're not going to pay us any money. We're going to rebuild that country afterward, probably, or part of it." Others reflected that same sentiment. And when, again, going back to this, the immigration aspect of the package, the idea that you count this as a win when there was a, frankly, very conservative immigration bill on the table that could have been accepted by Republicans in addition to a deal like this that could have been improved upon from a Republican perspective once Donald Trump was in office, is really does seem like all of this fighting was over naught. And here's the response. And this is, I think, the really key point here that we should keep observing as the weeks and months tick forward. Sean Davis, who is the CEO and co-founder of The Federalist, was very critical of Mike Johnson, saying Mike Johnson is an enemy of the people and the Constitution. What a pathetic, cowardly embarrassment Johnson is. But that same tone is not being directed toward Donald Trump, without whom, according to Lindsey Graham, this deal never would have happened in the first place.
Of course not. Are you crazy? They can't. What? No conservative media figure, political figure has ever, wanted to actually go against, has reaped any benefit from going against Trump. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michael.
No, I mean, Trump is the leader of the Republican Party at this juncture, and, Republicans try to steer clear of him. We have seen a number of repercussions for Republicans on Capitol Hill who have first backed Ron DeSantis and not former President Trump, even if after DeSantis dropped out, they have gone into Trump's corner and endorsed him. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's, any scenario where a Republican wants to go out of their way to contrast Donald Trump on something like this.
All right, America first. We'll see if that language survives this kind of a bill being signed into law. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michael Schnell.
Thanks, guys.